This next section she's entitled Darwinian Psychopaths, right? She says Romans 1 says that God gives people up. So that's kind of what we were mentioning a bit ago. To pursue their idols ever further, increasing the gap between what they profess and what they practice, right? So they profess something like no free will, but they practice we do have free will, and they hold people morally responsible for what they do.
And we hope other people have free will.
Yeah, right? She says we can picture worldviews falling along a continuum. The more consistently people work out the logic of their worldviews, the more reductionistic the result will be.
Sure.
The wider the gap and the further it leaps into irrational mysticism. The choice facing them becomes ever clearer. Will they follow the evidence of general revelation, right? Or will they cling to their theories in the face of the evidence, right? In other words, will they continue to bash their nose against the wall, right?
Right.
So she wants us to follow a series of examples. She'll start here with Slingerman, and she wants us to see where his philosophy ends, right? Where it ends. So as a Darwinist and a materialist, he acknowledges that his reductionist view of humans as essentially robots is contrary to ordinary experience. No duh, right?
Right.
It is alien, quote, alien and often repugnant from any source of human perspective. So gesturing toward his own daughter, so now it gets personal, right? Slingerman writes, at an important and irrevocable level, the idea of my daughter as merely a complex robot carrying my genes into the next generation is both bizarre and repugnant to me, right? As it ought to be, right?
Yeah.
Such a reductionistic view, Nancy Pearcey tells us, inspires in us a kind of emotional resistance and even revulsion.
Yeah.
So Slingerman is revulsed at the outcome of his worldview.
Right. He looks at his daughter and says the purpose of his life is just to carry on his genes.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one. So he looks at his daughter and goes, I've made it. There's my daughter. She's alive. Success. I've succeeded in life. That's all she is just a product of it's his blue ribbon.
A gene carrying machine.
And then to go further and say, her only purpose is to continue to carry my genes, and so she's just a sack of meat to a father, or to birth a child and continue the at least only half of his, or a quarter of his.
And he
his
recognizes
DNA.
that that's bizarre and repugnant, right? I mean, it's revolting, to think about that. Indeed, she says, he writes, if you do not feel that revulsion, something is wrong with you. Right?
Well, he's just not making this easy. No.
He says there may well be individuals who lack this sense and who can quite easily and thoroughly conceive of themselves and other people in purely instrumental, mechanistic terms, but we label such people psychopaths. And quite rightly try to identify them and put them away somewhere to protect the rest of us from the folks that attempt to live out what he says we should believe, or what he says is the case, right? So Nancy Pearcey tells us, what can we say when someone urges us to adopt a view of humanity that he himself admits is bizarre and repugnant, a view that ought to inspire revulsion, a view so dangerous that when acted upon, it would be justifiable for us to label people as sociopaths and lock them up, right? She says there's a severe clash between what his Darwinian materialism tells him in the downstairs, this is what's true, right, and what his lived experience tells him in the upstairs. And I don't really believe that, I don't really believe this, but I got to live that way. So which one will he accept as true? Right.
People are computers, and so their actions, you should arrest them and hold them accountable and punish them based on their choices from a system that is cold, hard facts and logic. Yeah. And so we don't do that. We don't do that with computers.
Yeah, really.
The nuclear missile launches prematurely, and we go, oh, it's got a bug. but we don't say it made a moral action. It's
That's
wrong.
Right. That's right.
It needs to be punished.
That's right.
And no more RAM for you. Well, no, that's not at all what we do.
We're gonna unplug you, buddy.
Yeah.
Right. She says. So she says to describe this kind of clash that we see here. She thinks maybe cognitive dissonance may be too tame of a word. And she says this. This is a searing contradiction, right? Paul writes that those who build their lives on idols become futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts are darkened. Romans 1:21. And so, she says the Greek word for futile here means unproductive, ineffective, failing to achieve its purpose. As this example clearly shows, idol-based worldviews do not produce what a philosophy of life is meant to give us. And what's that? A coherent, logically satisfying worldview that makes sense of all of life. Right?
Everything has to fit in the box.
Yeah. And so she says, no wonder Paul writes that those who reject the Creator are without excuse. The phrase means without a defense, right? It's kind of, it's using that word that we get apologetics from, right? It originally referred to a legal defense in a courtroom. So these people are without excuse because they're banging their nose up against the wall of reality, and they're attempting to tell us that that doesn't exist, right? So the strength of her approach, she reminds us, is that it shows why worldviews fail on their own terms. On their own terms. This is what you say the way the world is, and yet you can't live consistently like that, and you have to pretend that something else is the case in order to be able to live out in the world.
Right. It's an illusion. It only appears that way.
Yeah.
You can't live despite the initial belief, all those things.
Right. And so what we do then is we kind of show them on their own terms, where their worldview leads us in terms of how it relates to the real world. She says it's rarely persuasive to criticize other views from within your own perspective. All that really shows is that those other views disagree with you. Instead, you must step imaginatively inside other perspectives to show from within why they lack explanatory power.
Right. So a window versus a mirror. So you're on the side of the living room, you're pointing out into the world that they are claiming is there, and you're showing them through the window. Here's your implications. This is what you want. This is your explanatory power. And hopefully they'll either say yes, and then you can call them a psychopath, which they then call themselves.
Right.
Or what you do then is you hold up the mirror to them and say, can you then live within your own means? Does the system that you would adhere to kind of self-implode? So that's the next principle that we'll get to.